The morning sun reflected off the glass walls of Brightwell Enterprises, painting the lobby in sharp lines of light as if to signal the power that dwelled within. Among the polished floors and the soft hum of air conditioning, employees hurried past, their eyes fixed on their tasks, unaware that today would be anything but ordinary. Jessica Carter, the Black CEO of Carter Innovations, walked toward the entrance, her presence calm, understated, yet carrying an aura of authority. She wore a simple black blazer over a white blouse, her hair neatly styled, and carried no flashy bag or jewelry, yet every step she took spoke of confidence and power. As she reached the reception desk, she noticed the curious, judging eyes of the people around, and she also noticed the stark contrast in how others were treated. A tall man in a designer suit had been greeted warmly, smiled at, and offered assistance, while Jessica, equally composed and elegant, received nothing but hesitant glances. Behind the sleek reception desk stood Ashley Monroe, a young woman with cold blue eyes and a sneer that never left her lips. She was busy scrolling through her phone, completely ignoring the guests who approached. Jessica waited patiently for a moment, then spoke in a calm, clear voice. "Good morning. I have an appointment with Mr. Richard Lawson at 9 o'clock. Could you check for me?" Ashley glanced up slowly, her eyes scanning Jessica from head to toe, an unmistakable look of disdain crossing her face. "Name?" she asked, her tone flat and mocking. "Jessica Carter," replied Jessica, her voice steady, polite yet firm. Ashley scoffed, muttering under her breath loud enough for Jessica to hear. "Delivery entrance is at the back. People like you don't use the front." Jessica felt a familiar sting, a mixture of anger and disbelief, yet she kept her composure. "I am not here for deliveries. I have a scheduled meeting regarding a partnership deal with Mr. Lawson. Please check the schedule," she said, her eyes locking with Ashley's, showing no fear. Ashley pretended to type on the computer, then looked up, her smirk widening. "No appointment under that name. Maybe you got the wrong place. Better leave before I call security," she said, raising her hand to gesture sharply toward Jessica. Jessica's calm gaze did not waver. She looked down at Ashley's hand gripping her sleeve, then slowly back into her eyes. "Remove your hand from me," she said, her voice gentle yet commanding, causing Ashley to hesitate for the first time. Panic flashed briefly in Ashley's eyes, then she screamed for security. "Security! There's a problem here!" In moments, two large guards rushed forward, grabbing Jessica by the arms and pushing her toward the exit. She did not resist, standing tall, her pride intact. Her eyes briefly swept over the Brightwell logo etched in gold on the far wall, a symbol of their supposed power. From the executive mezzanine, Mark Reynolds, the executive vice president, stepped out, seeing Jessica pushed away. He froze for a heartbeat, recognition dawning, but he chose silence, a small, knowing smirk playing on his lips. Nearby, Vanessa Lewis, the only black manager on the floor, watched in shock and fury, her heart racing as she witnessed the humiliation, but she remained frozen, aware of the dangers of speaking up. Outside, Jessica paused on the sidewalk. The morning bustle around her, she raised her phone, pressed a single button, and spoke with measured calm. "Execute Plan B," she said, her words carrying a quiet storm, a promise that the injustice she had suffered would soon be avenged. And with that, she walked away slowly, each step echoing the strength of a woman who would not be underestimated. While inside, Ashley Monroe returned to her desk, smug and self-satisfied, stroking her designer blazer, whispering to her colleague, "People like that think they're important. It's a shame they never realize their place." Little did she know she had just triggered a chain of events that would bring the walls of Brightwell crashing down, and the calm, confident woman she had dismissed would be the architect of their downfall. Respect, humility, and power had silently walked out the door, and the reckoning would follow shortly behind. Jessica walked calmly down the busy streets, her mind sharp, focused on the task ahead. Each step was deliberate, measured, as if the world around her moved in slow motion, oblivious to the storm quietly forming. She had endured disrespect many times before, but this morning, it had ignited something different, a resolve that would not be silenced. Pulling her phone from her pocket, she opened a secure app, her fingers gliding over the screen with precision. Within moments, key players around Brightwell Enterprises received subtle alerts, small nudges disguised as routine notifications, yet each one carried the seeds of disruption. Across town, Ashley Monroe sipped her latte, smug and self-satisfied, unaware that every action, every arrogant word had been meticulously noted. Her colleague leaned over, whispering, "I think she's gone for good, finally." Ashley smiled, convinced the incident was over, that the powerful woman had been expelled from their world. Inside the Brightwell boardroom, executives buzzed with the usual morning chatter, oblivious to the tremors about to shake their carefully constructed empire. Mark Reynolds leaned back in his chair, quietly observing, his lips curving into a subtle smirk. He knew the calm, collected woman who had been shoved out earlier held influence far beyond what anyone realized. Elsewhere, Jessica initiated her first move, a series of anonymous tips to Brightwell's investors and partners, each message highlighting overlooked financial irregularities and warning of potential risks. The emails were precise, accurate, impossible to ignore, yet no one knew who had sent them. Within hours, whispers of concern began circulating. Conversations in hushed tones replaced the usual casual chatter. Tension hung in the air, invisible yet suffocating. Brightwell's employees began to notice subtle anomalies, missed deadlines, discrepancies in reports. Nothing overt yet, but enough to unsettle confidence. Ashley continued her day, oblivious, answering phones and scanning for visitors. Her earlier arrogance gave her a false sense of control. She did not see the invisible web closing around her company. Meanwhile, Vanessa Lewis sat at her desk, her hands trembling slightly. She had seen the humiliation Jessica had faced, felt it herself through years of subtle prejudice. Now she sensed a quiet justice beginning, her heart swelling with a mixture of hope and cautious anticipation. Back on the streets, Jessica entered a small, understated office, the headquarters of Carter Innovations. She made a few calls, each brief conversation carefully orchestrated. Her instructions were clear, precise, a network of allies moving like clockwork. By mid-afternoon, Brightwell's first tremors became public. Rumors of financial instability leaked, stock prices wavered, and murmurs of executive mismanagement began circulating. Mark Reynolds watched from a distance, a faint smile on his face. He knew this was only the beginning. The receptionist, Ashley, finally noticed the subtle shift, phones ringing off the hook, emails piling up, her calm facade beginning to crack. She approached the boardroom, overhearing snippets of urgent conversation, disbelief etched across her face. For the first time, Ashley Monroe realized that the woman she had dismissed, the black CEO she had mocked, was orchestrating an unseen force capable of shaking the foundations of the company. Jessica's presence had never been loud or obvious, but the power behind her moves was undeniable, calculated, and relentless. Every seemingly minor action she had taken earlier was now rippling outward. Each executive meeting, each stockholder discussion, now carried her invisible hand. A subtle chaos, precise and unavoidable, was beginning to unfold. As the day drew to a close, Ashley stared at her computer screen, the first signs of panic creeping into her carefully curated world. She tried to reassure herself, blaming market fluctuations, administrative errors, anything but the woman she had so confidently humiliated that morning. Vanessa Lewis, meanwhile, allowed herself a small, private smile, recognizing that respect, integrity, and power were about to reclaim their rightful place. And as Jessica stepped out of her office into the evening light, calm and composed, she knew this was just the beginning. The chessboard was set, the pieces moving, and the reckoning for underestimation and arrogance was already in motion. Every slight, every disrespectful word would soon meet its consequence. Patience, precision, and resilience were her allies, and she intended to let them speak for themselves. The morning light spilled over the towering glass walls of Brightwell Enterprises, but inside the atmosphere had shifted. Whispers and uneasy glances replaced the usual confident chatter. Stock tickers flashed unsettling numbers. Emails piled into inboxes marked urgent, and executives shuffled through reports with visible anxiety. At her desk, Ashley Monroe tried to maintain composure, but the cracks in her confident facade were growing. Every phone call, every message seemed to carry hints of the storm she could not yet see. A simple misstep, a small error, now magnified under scrutiny. She glanced toward the boardroom, overhearing tense exchanges between senior leaders. The confidence that had defined the company's morning now appeared brittle, shaky, vulnerable. Vanessa Lewis watched from across the floor, her eyes quiet but attentive. She knew what was happening. Had Fiwan, But the ripple of change set in motion the day Jessica Carter had been humiliated. The black CEO she had admired from afar was now orchestrating an invisible reckoning, and it was sweeping through the corridors of power. Meanwhile, Jessica moved with the same calm, collected demeanor she had always maintained. Sitting in her office at Carter Innovations, she observed the unfolding chaos from afar. Her team worked silently but efficiently, implementing subtle strategies that exposed weaknesses, highlighted inefficiencies, and questioned assumptions within Brightwell. Every move was calculated, precise, designed to awaken a truth, that disrespect and arrogance carry consequences. In the Brightwell lobby, employees noticed clients hesitating, phone calls going unanswered, minor errors compounding. By mid-morning, panic began creeping into Ashley's mind. A message from a board member flashed on her screen, urgent and pointed, questioning recent decisions and financial discrepancies. She scrolled frantically, trying to make sense of numbers that seemed to shift beneath her eyes. As she processed the growing unease, a colleague whispered nervously, "It's happening fast. Something's off." Ashley's heart raced, her earlier sense of superiority replaced with doubt, fear, and confusion. Upstairs, Mark Reynolds leaned against the railing of the executive mezzanine, observing the unfolding chaos. His eyes tracked the reactions, noting Ashley's growing panic, Vanessa's quiet, knowing satisfaction, and the subtle, nervous energy among the board. He allowed himself a small, satisfied smile, understanding that Jessica's quiet influence was now undeniable. Back at Carter Innovations, Jessica reviewed the latest reports, her mind already anticipating the next steps. She had predicted every possible reaction, every misjudgment, and now watched as the carefully constructed house of cards began to wobble. She picked up her phone and made a few calm, deliberate calls, each word measured, each instruction precise. By lunchtime, the financial discrepancies Jessica had quietly highlighted were now the subject of urgent board meetings at Brightwell. Executives debated internally, trying to identify the source of the errors, while Ashley felt herself shrinking under the weight of responsibility she could not fully comprehend. The receptionist who had once sneered at her now faced the reality that the world outside her small desk carried forces she could never control. Vanessa Lewis allowed herself a brief moment of pride, realizing that the dignity and respect denied to Jessica would soon be publicly acknowledged. Every small injustice, every cruel word, every act of underestimation would meet its reckoning in time. And as the afternoon sun climbed higher, Brightwell's leaders scrambled to understand the sudden instability, unaware that each tremor had been anticipated, each hesitation, each misstep perfectly orchestrated by the woman they had dismissed. In the quiet of her office, Jessica allowed herself a faint smile, calm yet resolute. Every moment of humiliation, every disrespectful glance had been absorbed, measured, and converted into action. The company's walls may have seemed impenetrable, the people inside confident in their perceived power, but no arrogance is immune to precision, patience, and insight. The first seeds of collapse had been sown, invisible yet unstoppable. Each executive, each employee would soon feel the weight of underestimation. And as Ashley stared at her screen, emails flying, urgent calls unanswered, and reports spiraling, the reality began to dawn that the woman she had dismissed was not just powerful, she was unstoppable. Every slight, every moment of arrogance, every misjudged glance would soon be repaid in full, and Jessica, calm and unshaken, moved quietly through the city, knowing that the storm she had begun would not just teach lessons, it would reshape the hierarchy entirely. The following morning, Brightwell Enterprises was tense, a quiet panic humming through the corridors. Employees whispered in hushed tones, glancing at screens, their faces pale as graphs, and reports showed the first clear signs of destabilization. Stock prices had dipped sharply overnight, and rumors of mismanagement were spreading like wildfire. In the reception area, Ashley Monroe sat rigid, her earlier confidence gone. She tapped her fingers nervously on the desk, emails piling up, messages from executives demanding explanations, her carefully curated sense of authority now crumbling under pressures she had never anticipated. Vanessa Lewis observed silently from across the floor, a sense of quiet vindication swelling in her chest. She had known Jessica Carter's capabilities and had felt the sting of prejudice herself. Now justice was beginning to unfold, and the woman who had been humiliated was driving it with precision. Upstairs, Mark Reynolds monitored the situation with cold satisfaction. Every subtle shift, every sign of panic, matched the pattern he had anticipated. Jessica's influence was growing, and Brightwell's leaders had no idea where the threat originated. Meanwhile, in her office, Jessica reviewed the latest market movements, her calm exterior masking the intensity of her mind at work. She had studied Brightwell for months, understanding their weaknesses, their overconfidence, their reliance on appearances rather than true competence. Her plan unfolded like clockwork, each move designed to exploit arrogance and prejudice. By late morning, Ashley received a call from the CFO, his voice tight with stress. "Ashley, can you explain these discrepancies? These numbers don't make sense." She swallowed hard, realizing she had no satisfactory explanation. Her confidence shattered, replaced by fear. Each report she opened seemed to reveal more problems than solutions. Her earlier judgment of Jessica Carter as insignificant now haunted her. Vanessa Lewis watched Ashley struggle, feeling a mixture of pity and triumph. She knew the receptionist had believed herself untouchable, and now the invisible hand of justice was making its presence felt. Across the city, Jessica made a series of quiet but impactful calls. Each word was precise, each instruction executed flawlessly. Allies at investment firms, regulatory bodies, and media contacts all played their part. Subtle pressure was mounting on Brightwell, unnoticed yet devastating. The executives were scrambling, attempting damage control, their efforts clumsy and reactive. By afternoon, internal meetings erupted into chaos. The CEO, Richard Lawson, demanded explanations, his voice sharp, but no one could provide clear answers. The company that had once exuded power and control now teetered on the edge of crisis. Ashley Monroe, pale and trembling, could only watch as the world she had believed was solid crumbled around her. Calls from board members, legal teams, and investors kept arriving, each one tightening the invisible noose. Vanessa Lewis felt a quiet satisfaction, realizing that the humiliation Jessica had endured was now mirrored in the panic surrounding Ashley. Across the street, Jessica observed the progress with calm, her expression serene, each domino falling exactly as she had anticipated. Every slight, every dismissive glance, every condescending word spoken at the lobby desk that morning had been carefully cataloged and transformed into leverage. By evening, Brightwell's stock continued to drop. Media outlets picked up on sudden instabilities, and employees murmured nervously about leadership failures. Ashley's phone buzzed incessantly. She could barely keep up, her once proud aura reduced to anxiety and shame. Vanessa Lewis allowed herself a small smile, knowing that respect, integrity, and patience were prevailing where arrogance and prejudice had failed. Jessica's plan was not just about revenge, it was about revealing the truth. About showing that power and respect cannot be faked, that those who judge others by appearances alone often find themselves powerless. And as night fell, Jessica stepped out into the calm streets, the city lights reflecting her composed, determined figure. She knew the storm she had unleashed was far from over. The ripple effect had begun, and those who underestimated her would soon learn that strength, dignity, and intelligence always demand recognition. The world may have tried to dismiss her in the morning, but by evening it was clear. Underestimation has a cost, and Jessica Carter had the power to make them pay. The next morning, Brightwell Enterprises was no longer merely unstable, it teetered on the brink of ruin. The once proud employees moved through the hallways with tense expressions, whispers of panic and confusion replacing the familiar hum of confidence. Every glance at a screen, every hurried conversation carried the weight of impending disaster. Ashley Monroe, the receptionist who had earlier dismissed Jessica Carter, sat frozen at her desk, her hands trembling. The emails, calls, and urgent messages from executives seemed endless. Her carefully constructed sense of control had evaporated, replaced by a gnawing fear she could not ignore. Vanessa Lewis watched silently, her expression calm, knowing that justice was unfolding. The humiliation that Jessica had endured at this very lobby desk was now mirrored across the company in the chaos Ashley faced. Upstairs, Mark Reynolds observed the events with quiet satisfaction. The ripple Jessica had initiated was now a tidal wave, and the executives scrambled helplessly beneath it. In her office at Carter Innovations, Jessica reviewed the latest reports, calm, collected, and in control. Each number, each stock movement, and each whispered rumor had been anticipated. Every minor detail she had plowed, and now amplified, spreading through Brightwell like wildfire. By mid-morning, executives called emergency meetings, their voices tight with panic. Richard Lawson, the CEO, demanded answers from his management team. How did this happen? Explain these numbers immediately. But no one had answers. No one could stop the unraveling chaos. Meanwhile, Ashley's phone rang endlessly, each call carrying urgency, authority, or accusation. She tried to respond, to explain, but every word faltered. Every attempt seemed only to deepen the sense of crisis. Vanessa Lewis felt a swell of vindication, realizing that the arrogance and prejudice that had fueled Ashley's earlier cruelty were now meeting the consequences they deserved. Across the city, Jessica made another series of calm, precise calls. Investors, media contacts, and strategic partners all acted in ways that heightened the pressure on Brightwell. Yet none knew who had orchestrated the sequence, and that invisibility was Jessica's greatest weapon. By late afternoon, Brightwell's stock plummeted sharply. Panic spread among shareholders. Rumors of mismanagement and unethical practices surfaced online. Social media amplified every small flaw, every financial discrepancy, making the company's struggles public. Ashley finally understood the magnitude of what she had triggered. The receptionist who had sneered at a black CEO now watched helplessly as the empire she once believed untouchable collapsed piece by piece. Vanessa Lewis allowed herself a quiet sigh of relief, knowing that the dignity and respect Jessica had been denied was now being restored. And in the midst of the chaos, Jessica remained calm, composed, unshaken. Every action she had taken, every strategy she had implemented was precise, calculated, and deliberate. Her patience, intelligence, and resilience had turned humiliation into power, into a force that no arrogance or prejudice could withstand. By evening, Brightwell's board called for an emergency session to assess the damage. The executives scrambled to contain the fear. All out, their confidence shattered. Their arrogance replaced with fear, their assumptions about appearances and social status now exposed as dangerously flawed. Ashley, pale and shaken, could only sit at her desk, realizing too late that dismissing Jessica Carter had been a catastrophic mistake. Vanessa Lewis observed quietly, witnessing the full measure of justice. As night fell, the city lights reflected off the glass walls of Carter Innovations, where Jessica stood calmly, observing the chaos she had orchestrated with quiet precision. The lesson was clear. Respect cannot be demanded through status or appearance. It is earned, and those who underestimate others, especially through prejudice or arrogance, will always face the consequences. Jessica's storm had reached its crescendo, and the world outside Brightwell had begun to see the true power of resilience, intelligence, and dignity. The day's events would be remembered, not just as a corporate collapse, but as a lesson in humility, and as proof that no slight goes unnoticed, no act of disrespect goes unanswered, and the woman who had been underestimated that morning now held the full measure of influence, poised to ensure justice was complete. The morning at Brightwell Enterprises began with tension thicker than ever. Employees moved silently through the hallways, their eyes fixed on screens displaying plummeting stock values. Urgent messages pinged incessantly, and phone calls demanded immediate action. Ashley Monroe, once brimming with confidence and arrogance, now sat frozen at her desk. The receptionist who had mocked Jessica Carter just days before was overwhelmed by fear, shame, and disbelief. Her earlier smirk, her sense of control, had evaporated, replaced by the crushing reality that she had underestimated someone far beyond her comprehension. Vanessa Lewis watched quietly, her heart a mixture of pride, awe, and relief. She had witnessed injustice firsthand, had seen Jessica humiliated in that same lobby, and now justice was arriving, silent, precise, and undeniable, upstairs. Mark Reynolds observed from the mezzanine, a subtle smile on his lips. He had known the quiet power Jessica possessed, and now the world was finally beginning to see it too. Meanwhile, Jessica Carter sat calmly in her office at Carter Innovations, her presence serene, poised, unshakable. The empire she had carefully observed, studied, and predicted was crumbling exactly as she had envisioned. Every decision, every move, every subtle nudge had set in motion an unstoppable chain of events. By mid-morning, the full scope of Brightwell's instability was undeniable. The boardroom erupted in chaotic meetings, executives shouting over one another, trying desperately to regain control. But the company's foundations had already shifted. The arrogant confidence that once permeated the building now lay in ruins. Ashley's phone rang relentlessly, calls from investors, legal teams, and executives pouring in. Each message intensified her panic. She scrambled to respond, but every attempt only highlighted the depth of the problems. The receptionist, who had believed she held power over others, now faced the full weight of her misjudgment. Vanessa Lewis allowed herself a small, private smile, knowing that the woman who had been wronged would finally see vindication. Across the city, Jessica made calm, precise calls, each word measured, each instruction executed flawlessly. Her invisible hand guided events, turning uncertainty into inevitability. By afternoon, media outlets caught wind of Brightwell's turmoil. Articles detailed sudden financial instability, leadership mismanagement, and the unraveling of what had seemed like a secure corporate giant. Social media amplified every flaw, every error, magnifying the consequences of arrogance and prejudice. Ashley stared at her screen, pale and trembling. The same receptionist who had mocked, sneered, and dismissed Jessica Carter now faced a public reckoning, her world unraveling before her eyes. Vanessa Lewis watched, satisfaction tempered with quiet reflection, understanding that the lesson being delivered was larger than any one individual. It was about integrity, humility, and the dangers of judging others. By evening, the final domino fell. Brightwell Enterprises announced emergency measures, staff reductions, and a complete reevaluation of partnerships. Their arrogance, ignorance, and prejudice laid bare for all to see. Jessica's plan had succeeded without a single overt confrontation. Her intelligence, patience, and resilience had transformed humiliation into a force unstoppable. Ashley slumped in her chair, the reality of her actions and inactions finally hitting her. Vanessa Lewis allowed herself a moment of satisfaction, witnessing justice served, fair and precise. Across the city, Jessica stepped out into the cool evening, the lights reflecting off the streets, calm, collected, and triumphant. She had endured disrespect, prejudice, and underestimation. Yet she had turned every slight into a lesson in power, dignity, and strategic brilliance. The day had ended not just with a company's collapse, but with a lesson in humility, a reminder that appearances deceive, arrogance blinds, and respect is never optional. And as Jessica walked away, her presence silent but commanding, the world knew a truth that would resonate far beyond Brightwell's walls. Underestimate anyone, and you may find yourself undone.